All right, so the topic of this video is going to be Jorge Masvidal, who he's going to fight next. But first, I am going to lay a couple things out. Number one being how hard Kamaru Usman is blowing this. Like, blowing it. If I was his manager, I would be puking inside of my mouth. And I think Ali manages him. So Ali knows what he's doing. So I have no idea how he's allowing this to happen. This is such a bad play and a catastrophe, potentially. And I'll explain exactly why. First, let me lay out who I think it's possible Jorge ends up fighting, and then we'll come back to Kamaru, and then I'll break down those fights. Okay, you got 6 options. Conor McGregor, Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, Nick Diaz, Nate Diaz, Leon Edwards. Do you like how I tried to do that with my fingers and just failed? Okay, those are the 6 that it could be with Jorge, and I'll break those down. But first, now let's talk about Kamaru and why this is such a bad career decision, okay? Aside from the fact that he looks like he doesn't like defending the belt because he won the belt, took him a year to fight, now he's doing this again. But listen, okay? Out of anyone who could fight for the belt, fighting Kamaru, his next fight, okay, so it could be Jorge Masvidal, Colby Covington, Tyron Woodley rematch. Those are probably your 3 options, or maybe Conor McGregor if like Khabib didn't want to fight or something. I don't know. That's not gonna happen, okay? So really, Tyron Woodley, Colby, or Leon Edwards, or Jorge Masvidal. Okay, Jorge Masvidal, actually, let me rewind. If you have the belt and you fight in a belt, actually just if you have the belt and you're a main event, you get a piece of the pay-per-view, okay? Do you understand how many more pay-per-views Jorge Masvidal versus Usman is going to sell than Tyron Woodley versus Usman is going to sell? You're literally, like, whatever reason you have for not fighting Jorge right now, I hope it's worth $3 or $4 million, or more. You know, Nate Diaz made $10 million for the rematch against Conor, and he didn't even have a belt. Like, when you go online and watch, like, I watched this thing on like one of these MMA channels yesterday, and they were talking about how much money guys have made over their lifetime in the UFC. And they're like, this is a channel that had 30,000 subscribers. I literally, like, I'm not one of these guys who's gonna go like try to vulture people off of other channels, but this is the first time I've ever done this. I commented, I was like, dude, you guys are listening to this? These guys have no idea what they're talking about. Come to my channel and learn something. Because like they had Conor McGregor's career earnings with the UFC at $13 million. I'm like, Conor makes more than that it's so wrong. Like, because what they're doing is they're going off the disclosed amounts. Conor made $1 million for this fight. Right, he got a guaranteed show up and make $1 million. Then the pay-per-view, he gets a percentage of that. You think Conor McGregor is fighting for $1 million or whatever is disclosed, $2 million max? No, he's fighting for $25 million when he fights in the UFC, okay? Khabib has the same deal as Conor now. He's making ridiculous money on the back end. And Kamaru Usman is a belt holder. He gets back end. So how many pay-per-views get sold? He gets a gigantic payday. That's why when you look at like Dustin Poirier, who had an interim belt, when he fought Khabib in Abu Dhabi, he got pay-per-view. Why do you think that guy hasn't fought in so long? He got a massive check. So he's chilling for a while, right? And so Kamaru Usman, this is the thing, dude. I watched Conor's documentary, right? I know Conor's knee was hurt. You know, when he fought Chad Mendes, his knee was hurt and he was fighting a guy on 2 weeks' notice who was for sure going to try to take him down. And he had a torn ACL and he fought anyway. So like, I need blah, blah. I mean, if you have a legit injury, awesome. If it's not legit and you're just like, I need to be 100% every time I fight, and you're choosing to not take the Jorge Masvidal fight, dude, what are you doing? You know? And if the guy hadn't done this last time and the time, like, he's a guy who's I think he just wants to hold on to the belt as long as possible. I think that he made some good money on the Colby fight. I think he just wants to hold the belt as long as possible, right? And the less you fight, the more likely you are to hold the belt. That's my impression of him, okay? He doesn't seem like a guy who's anxious to fucking put it on the line, right? I mean, that's my impression of him. Such a bad call. I mean, so much more money. And what if Jorge loses? Like, look at the lineup of killers I just laid out. What if Jorge loses? I mean, I like Jorge in almost all of those fights, but what if he loses? What if they put him against Tyron Woodley, okay? Then he's 50-50 at best to win that fight, and you're 50-50 at best to lose $4 or $5 million. How long, like, you only have a very short window for your career, okay? These guys who are not pushing to fight, I don't understand it. Now, I do understand if you have the belt, it's possible that his outlook is, I need to make 100% sure that I win every time I fight because I only have this amount of time. And if I push it into the octagon when I'm not ready and I lose, then that's 1 to 2 fights where I don't have the belt and the lost earnings are tremendous. But in the case of this particular fight with Jorge, the amount of extra additional money you'll make on that fight, the equation won't make sense if there's even a question about whether or not to fight. Like, you gotta take that fight. Okay, anyway, so Jorge Masvidal, the other 6, let's talk about these. Conor McGregor, no chance, I don't think. I mean, it's possible, that's why I threw him in there, but listen, if you're Dana White, and he said this publicly, Conor's fighting Khabib next. Khabib's next fight is Conor. That is happening, forget about anything else. There is no other scenario that has to do with those two fighters. Those two are fighting, okay? Period. Period. It's the biggest pay-per-view ever. It'll be the biggest pay-per-view again. Dana is a businessman. He's going to pay those guys and that fight's happening. Period. Okay? So that leaves us with, let's say, Tyron Woodley. I do not like that fight at all because Tyron Woodley is the biggest risk to Jorge losing out of all of those guys with the least amount of upside for the business and for Jorge, right? Like Jorge, dude, Tyron Woodley is a beast. The idea of fighting Tyron Woodley when he doesn't have the belt, when there's not that upside to fighting him, why? You know, Jorge's gonna get paid that main event pay-per-view money regardless, like he did for Nate Diaz. So why would he go up against Tyron Woodley? Fight Tyron Woodley when you're defending the belt. Why? I mean, you know what I mean? That just doesn't make any sense, but it's possible. So that's why I've got him down here at the bottom with Conor McGregor. Next, you got Nick Diaz. Now I'm gonna say Nick Diaz is a very low probability, although probably the highest grossing number for Jorge. So if Nick Diaz will fight Jorge, that's the fight he's gonna take, straight up. Because number one, it's the lowest risk, which is the same reason why I don't think it's gonna happen. Because Nick Diaz, when he went on the Ariel show, did not look like a person who should be anywhere near an octagon unless he goes to rehab first. And that's assuming that what I saw in that interview was not permanent brain damage. I am assuming that's not what it is because Nick is a sharp guy. I just think he likes to party. Every time he posts on Instagram, he's partying. So most likely what's going on is he's just partying his balls off, right? And then somehow partying turns into, this is just my life, I'm drunk all the time, right? He needs to go to rehab, you know, dry out, then he can go fight Jorge. But if Jorge gets that opportunity, that's the dude he should fight. Because Nick Diaz hasn't fought in 100 years. He's drunk. Like, he'll be in shape. He'll be a game fighter, but Jorge will walk through him. And that pay-per-view will do him, oh my God, he'll make a fortune. But that's probably not gonna happen, okay? Then you got Nate Diaz rematch. Totally possible. That could happen. And that will be a huge pay-per-view. So Jorge will be stoked if that's what it is, because also, what about that first fight made it seem like Nate Diaz is going to win the second fight? Not much. Now, I will say this. I watched that fight again very recently. Jorge was actually slowing down a little bit in the third round. A little bit. He really actually was. The first couple times I watched it, all I saw was Jorge just running through Nate Diaz like a chainsaw through butter. You know, he did get hit with a few shots, but I mean, he was annihilating Nate. Like that was a very one-sided fight. But it did look like he was slowing down a little bit at the end of the third round. He looked a little bit tired, but that doesn't mean that Nate was going to win. And I think Jorge very easily will do the same thing that he did the first time. You know, I think he figured out a really strong game plan against Nate that he implemented well, and I think he'll do the exact same thing the second time. If Nate Diaz is on the table, Jorge takes that fight, because Jorge said straight up, he's about the money. He wants to make as much money as possible in his career. That's why if Nate's on the table, he will probably take that fight. Okay, the other one is Leon Edwards. So the last two are Colby Covington, Leon Edwards. I saved them for last because those are the ones that he has beef with. Well, okay, he has beef for sure with Leon Edwards because he punched him in the face after the Darren Till fight. And he has beef with Colby because they've said they have beef in the media for the last 3 years. I don't believe it. But everybody else does, so it'll sell a lot of pay-per-views. But again, I don't love that fight, man. Why? Again, like Colby, just because there's enough beef with Colby and he has enough kind of push behind his name, it's better than Tyron Woodley. But to me, I'm like, that's the toughest fight out there, you know, for equal money to what you'd get for Nate Diaz. And the last one is Leon Edwards. And so it's hard for me to even break down the Colby Covington one because so much of that matters if they actually really have beef. I look at the mental side of this game a lot. Like when I'm thinking about who's going to win a fight, the psychological side is a very central piece of how I'm breaking a fight down. And without knowing for sure whether the beef with Colby is real, that's a really hard one to break down. Like you have no idea. The dynamic between two guys who really genuinely like each other outside the octagon versus two guys who hate each other, it is very different because it benefits people in different ways. Some people benefit, you know, from being buddies with a guy, and some people benefit from not liking them, and some people they have a really hard time fighting against a guy that they like. Cowboy Cerrone is one of those guys. That's why I know that Conor put that mental game on him before the fight. Conor, look, I am a very gifted individual when it comes to reading people. Conor is just like me, except probably much better. So if I know that about Cowboy, then so does Conor. And that's why Conor put the boo game on him. And he just, hey, that's a beautiful, that python skin, that's a beautiful skin, Cowboy. Make Cowboy love him so that he starts slow, and then Conor can kick his head off, right? So without knowing that between Colby and Jorge, it's a hard fight to break down. But man, that would be an incredible fight. But Leon Edwards is also, I would say the most likely is Leon Edwards or Nate Diaz, because Leon Edwards is right there in the #1 contender, and you have a backstage fight that you can use to promote that fight. Jorge is already a big enough name that he can be the tagline. Just like you could put Conor in there with anyone, it'll sell a bunch of pay-per-views. That's where Jorge's at now too. And if you've got a pre-game promo showing him, piecing up Leon Edwards after the Darren Till fight, that's a great promo. So yeah, I mean, I would say if I was gonna put the percentages on it, I would say it's 30% Leon Edwards, 30% Nate Diaz, 15% Colby, and then split the remainder among those other guys. But either way, the main point of this story though is that Kamaru Usman is blowing it, because if Jorge loses and he loses the opportunity to fight Jorge for the belt while Jorge is on this tear, literally millions of dollars missed out on. Millions. It's just an awful decision. Awful. Unless he has an absolutely immovable surgery. It's too big of a risk. That money is right there for you to take, and he's not taking it. So that makes me question his intelligence. But, what do I know? I'm not him. So that's what I got. Please like the channel and subscribe and all that stuff. Ring the bell. Let's go.